residents, prospective residents, folks searching for a new apartment to call home, folks living in an apartment today are demanding solutions. And if we don't adopt, we will soon be a relic.
Hello, and welcome to Sink or Swim, a weekly podcast brought to you by RentSync, where we take a deep dive into the PropTech, multifamily, and rental housing industry. In each episode, we uncover the technologies and strategies used to help overcome operational challenges and increase the value of your multifamily investments. So, let's get into our conversation today.
Welcome back to Sink or Swim. I'm Mitch Fanning with RentSync, and joining me today is Colleen Krempulec, VP of Brand Marketing and Corporate Social Responsibility at Hazelview Properties, formerly Timber Creek Communities, a property management company in Canada with a reputation for putting its residents first. Colleen, how are you doing today?
Hi, good, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're joining us today. Why don't you do that intro some justice by maybe expanding on it and telling us a little bit more about yourself and how you got started in the industry?
Sure thing, Mitch. How did I get started in the industry? Well, I actually cut my teeth in consumer packaged goods, not real estate, spending a number of years on both the agency side of the business and the client side of the business, working on a range of tier one brands across sectors, including packaged foods, health and beauty, pharmaceuticals, consumer electronics, you name it. But after more than a decade of pushing consumer goods, I was ready to just try something entirely different. And I went looking for opportunities that would hopefully allow me to apply some of my branding experience elsewhere. Timber Creek at the time was looking to add their first senior level marketing team member. And they took a leap of faith on me, given I had no prior real estate or asset management experience. And I'm so glad that they did. I'm now going on 9 years at Hazelview, formerly Timber Creek, and have recently transitioned into my current role as Vice President of Brand Marketing and Corporate Social Responsibility.
Again, I told you before we hit record that I tend to go off script. And one of the things I noticed when I was doing some research is you've got a ton of volunteer experience under your belt, and you're kind of known for this, I'd call it this, someone who thinks that social justice is important. And, you know, when looking at Hazelview and kind of the way you guys put your residents first, I can't happen to notice that there's a bit of an alignment there between your values and Hazelview's values. Is that just a coincidence, or how did that play out?
No, it's not a coincidence. And it's probably one of the main reasons, you know, I've been here at Hazelview for now almost a decade. The core values that live within this organization are absolutely aligned with my core values about doing what's right and helping support the communities that we operate in. That has long been a part of who we are and what we do. Having recently transitioned into the position of corporate social responsibility, which is a new kind of position, if you will, for Hazelview, is really our organization's effort to put more resources and focus around that social work that we're committed to doing. For years, you could go into any department or any community that we operate in and see that social work is alive and well, but we're really trying to formalize that and make sure that it's strategically embedded in our organization. And so that's a big part of my new mandate. And as you mentioned, I do have a personal passion for social justice and supporting folks in need. So my new position is really well suited to my personal interests.
Well, you can definitely see it. I mean, when you go to the website, you can see it just from the branding to even the moving stories. And, you know, I know that you guys just rebranded in November. And, you know, when we did the pre-call, I promised I wasn't going to ask you the question why you guys rebranded. But one of the things I do want to ask is, when did you first decide to rebrand? And kind of walk me through that, maybe that first set of conversations when you decided to rebrand, and And maybe just if there was a time or if there was a person who maybe came up with the actual name Hazelview.
Sure thing. In 2020, we had some structural changes within the organization, and that's what really triggered the decision for us to rebrand from Timber Creek Communities to Hazelview Properties. Coming up with the name, it was no small or simple feat. It was a team effort. Team members from across the organization spent tons of time discussing, debating, and brainstorming. We partnered with Blackjet Inc., who led us in these efforts, and they really helped us craft a new brand identity that, we all felt strongly about, and one that we felt was really aligned to our DNA and our core values and our vision. Through the rebranding, we did a lot of soul searching and talking about what was it that we wanted the new brand identity to put out into the world. Organizationally, we've always believed that we look for value potential, perhaps that others have missed. And we take that approach to both human investment as well as obviously real estate investment. And we really focus on that value, and that value can come to life in many different ways. So we spent a lot of time discussing what was important to us as an organization and what it was we did day in and day out. And we wanted to make sure that that was reflected in the new brand identity. People, as with any company, will ask, why is your name this or that? People will say, why Hazelview? The answer isn't probably apparent or obvious to anybody, but for us, we spent a lot of time talking about organic nature and trees and things that we identified with. And the hazel tree apparently, I guess, the tree of wisdom and learning. It represents creativity and inspiration. It symbolizes wealth and health and happiness. So our team immediately connected to that. And then we often talk about the fact that our job is to have an outlook and a perspective on things and to examine and scrutinize opportunities for potential. So the hazel and the view, when put together, we felt was just kind of a nice word mashup that reflected who we were really well.
Yeah. And obviously we went through a similar process at RentSync. We were formerly LWS. Now we're RentSync. And there's obviously a lot that goes into it, but to kind of simplify it, what we were, we kind of no longer did. We kind of grew up essentially. And so it was time to kind of evolve and change. So during our prep call, you mentioned, when we were talking about this subject, you mentioned that the resident is your brand. And I thought that was really interesting, and it kind of resonated with me. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. We're in property management, and residents and people and employees are really at the heart of what we do. As a team, we're really proud of the buildings that we own and the buildings that we manage. But at the end of the day, those buildings are empty shells if it weren't for the people who live there and for the people who call those buildings their homes. Residents and neighbors are the life and personality, really, of any community. And at Hazelview Properties, we want to recognize that. And I really wanted our brand work to reflect that. So when residents and employees see us or interact with us, they interact with our brand. My vision was that they would see themselves reflected back. They wouldn't see a corporate, like a faceless corporation or just a logo. What they're seeing is themselves reflected back authentically and honestly. So our marketing work is really trying to take a people-centric approach, as cliche as that may sound.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to the show.
Sure. Well, again, I think you've done a fabulous job in the execution of that vision. Switching gears, obviously we couldn't get out of this conversation without talking about COVID. Obviously, COVID has affected a lot of businesses and people as well. Now, in addition to the rent relief program that Hazelview has put out, I believe it was later in the year or kind of mid in the year when it was kind of the peak of what was going on. How has, I guess, two-part question, how has Hazelview, in your mind, helped its residents, in addition to that, navigate through the difficult time? But I think more importantly, like, what are you personally most proud of?
I mean, that's a tough one. From the very early days of the pandemic, our team organized and rallied pretty quickly to not only figure out new ways of working and protocols to make sure that residents felt safe in their homes. There were a series of actions we put forth to help residents and community members. We immediately launched a rent support program, which was out there to help residents who were struggling to make their rent payment. And then subsequent to that, as you just mentioned, we launched what we called the Hazelview Cares Rent Relief Program to help further support residents with a rent credit, which was valued at up to 1 month of their current rent, ultimately looking to really help residents support themselves and their families. We launched a fundraising and matching program that benefited a number of organizations supporting communities, Kids Help Phone, Canadian Women's Foundation, Daily Bread Food Bank, Canadian Mental Health Association. I mean, there are a series of actions Hazelview put out over the course of the last year. But I have to say, the one initiative that I'm probably most proud of, which is kind of a small but mighty program in one or two of our buildings in particular, where we felt there was an acute need to help address food insecurity. And a couple of team members kind of took it upon themselves to go out and purchase fresh food boxes. So, knowing that food banks across the country were being overwhelmed with demand, we wanted to make sure that residents in need of food for themselves and their family were not only accessing food banks, but getting access to high quality fresh foods, which we know food banks struggle to deliver on that need. And so we had team members picking up dozens and dozens of boxes of fresh food every single week, knocking and dropping at the doorsteps of residents in need. And for me, I call it a small but mighty program because it's not a program that went coast to coast. It was pretty acute in one specific community, but that is the one I was most proud of.
That's great. I mean, I appreciate you sharing that. I guess as you were talking, maybe a follow-on question is, and this could be internal in terms of like how you and your team have worked or how internally Hazelview has kind of operated since the pandemic, but are there any positives that you can speak of or things that the company will continue to do as a result of having to kind of just switch gears and do things differently?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a tough year and it continues to be tough, right? We haven't seen the end of this, but we talk a lot with our team members about what have we done differently and what might we keep on doing. And for me, it goes back to just kind of old school, checking in on your neighbors and your community members, picking up the phone, placing a call, checking in to make sure people have what they need, checking in to make sure they're not alone or isolated. This is a time that really made us all realize the importance of reaching out to community members. And as property managers, we manage and operate buildings that people live in. And by extension of that, we are neighbors to these residents. And I think that is a practice that we'll take with us into the future, pandemic or no pandemic. Knock on the door, check in on your neighbors, make sure you're supporting each other, because we are seeing through those simple acts that it really does help build resilient communities.
I like that because as much as the pandemic has accelerated innovation, the fact, just the going back to basics and checking in with your neighbor, as simple as that is, and what that concept kind of means, because it's not just literally, but sometimes it just means, going back to the basics and going back to more maybe a simple life. People forget as much as we've adopted new technologies and new ways of doing things, sometimes we have to also kind of merge that with the basics in life. So I really like that concept that you brought up. Now, switching gears and kind of as we kind of come to a close and get to kind of my favorite part of the conversation, which is the quickfire round. There's a couple things that I want to end with this morning. And again, sometimes I throw these kind of things in last minute, but this morning, rentals.ca, they put out the rental market predictions report. And the one thing that really stood out to me was the fact that the pandemic has really ushered in the adoption of digital tools for renters and landlords and operators in order to stay competitive, which I believe personally that, it's here to stay. I guess my question to you is, would you agree with that statement? And kind of what are your thoughts on that?
I would 100% agree with that statement. Although the back to basics approach is something we should never toss out like yesterday's newspaper, that technology is here to stay and we have to adopt. And prospective residents, folks searching for a new apartment to call home, folks living in an apartment today are demanding solutions. And if we don't adopt, we will soon be a relic. We know that even in the last year, we've quickly had to adapt to virtual tours, for example. So the need to replace in-person tours is something we had to solve for almost overnight. So we are quickly moving to a situation where we have 3D virtual tours. We have apartments that need to be staged and shown to renters, but we can't get stagers in and we can't purchase furniture. So what do? We need to virtually stage. And you know what? It looks pretty darn good. And that quick switch alone in the last year has allowed us to keep up with the demand from residents to even search for an apartment in the virtual world.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I've noticed that too, the staging via digital means. So it's very cool stuff. All right. So as we come to a close here, we're gonna transition into the quickfire round. So Colleen, the way this works is I'll ask a question and you'll have 60 seconds or less to answer. Colleen, are you ready?
Oh boy, I'm not sure. All right, let's do it.
All right. Question 1, who should I have on this podcast?
Who should you have on this podcast? Well, of course, I'm going to recommend another colleague of mine at Hazelview Properties. I'm going to suggest you have Vanessa Mian on here. She is our head of people and culture. I've spent a lot of time just now speaking about our organization and our culture, and I think she would have a lot to offer on the importance of building a strong culture within any organization.
Very cool. All right. We'll put her, I'll make a note of that. Question 2, what's one thing you wish your phone could do?
That's easy. I wish my phone would find itself.
That's actually a new one. I haven't heard that one yet. Okay. Question 3. What have you changed your mind about lately?
What have I changed my mind about lately? Probably travel. If you'd asked me a couple years ago if I could travel anywhere, where would it be? I would pick somewhere far away, exotic, that I've never been before. And because of COVID, I've spent so much time this past year just researching where can I go within the boundaries of Canada. And lo and behold, there are endless places within this great country of ours to visit and experience different cultures. And probably one of the first things I'm going to do once I board a plane is check out some of the far-flung corners of our own country.
Yes, that's actually, I've actually done the opposite. I've seen a lot of Canada, and I would tend to agree. There's some really cool places to go in Canada right in our own backyard. All right. Question 4, what or who inspires you?
Regular, everyday folks inspire me. I was reading the Globe and Mail the other day, and they post a piece, maybe daily, maybe weekly, I'm not sure, that is reader submissions. And just, everyday folks write in some beautifully written pieces just about their lives and livelihoods. And those are my favorite articles in the paper. They're the first thing I read almost every day. And not only am I inspired by people's lives, I'm inspired by people who can write. So I'm a self-proclaimed bookworm. And so that's also something that inspires me.
That's great. I appreciate that answer. Last question is, where can people find more about you or Hazelview Properties on the interweb?
Hazelview Properties, you can check us out at hazelviewproperties.com or on our LinkedIn page. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn, Colleen Krempulec.
All right, perfect. We'll put that in the show notes. Well, that's it for another episode. Colleen, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time. And until next time, keep swimming.
All right. Thanks for having me, Mitch.
You've reached the end of another episode of Sink or Swim. Make sure to visit us at rensync.com/podcast to access show notes, key takeaways, and where you can sign up to our newsletter to receive free bonus content. If you found value in this show, please also remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Thanks for listening.